Thank you so much for joining us for our final event. I cannot believe that we have gotten to the end of our events here at Axios House. I know everyone has had a jam-packed week. We also have had such an amazing turnout. We've also had 11 events here during the week, speaking with leaders like Sam Altman of OpenAI, Alex Karp of Palantir, and many others. If you missed those conversations, you can follow us on any social media site, particularly YouTube. We have a lot of the conversations up there if you don't already. And if you would like to share today's event, please use the hashtag #AxiosEvents. With that, I'm thrilled to kick things off with my next guest to talk about how the private sector can best integrate thoughtful sustainability initiatives. She's the CEO and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact, Sanda Ojiambo. Sanda, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Welcome to Axios House.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. You had an impressive list of speakers before.
Again, you get to round off the list for us here. So we are here at WEF speaking about the future of responsible business, and I want to get into what the Global Compact is doing on that front later. But first, part of your job is also to talk about how CEOs are responsible for so much leadership through crisis, which I know has also been a subtext to so many conversations here, whether we're talking about the Ukraine war or the climate crisis. How much of that do you think is hindered by current relationships between the public and private sector?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. And look, I have to say, it's probably been the set of most turbulent years for CEOs that we speak to. We now have a membership of about 23,000. And last year we did a survey just to understand CEO sentiment. And it was fascinating to hear, first of all, the amount of convergence across CEOs in the North and the South, large companies and SMEs, simply just saying that for the first time across the board, the challenges they faced were all external to business. No CEO was particularly worried about their product placement and the P&L. They were concerned about how to navigate, as you called, challenging times, the impact of geopolitics, the climate crisis, widening social inequities, and all the things that we're talking about here, trust, misinformation, disinformation. That's weighing heavily on CEOs' minds. Couple that with the need to be sustainable, and then the need to produce financial results. I mean, it's a challenging time for business leaders. And then most importantly, as we talk about here in the overarching theme of being here in Davos about trust in industry sectors, between industry sectors and with governments. So many layers, and I think it's a really, really challenging time for business.
When you think about that challenging time and all of those things, how crucial is a public-private partnership in all of this?
Absolutely essential. I mean, part of the work that we do is also trying to get businesses in dialogue with governments for a number of reasons. In many instances, policy and regulation has been shaped by business. You talked about Sam Altman being here, and technology is a perfect example. I think a lot of times regulation and technology has been shaped by the fact that business has gone ahead of it. I've just been in a panel on shipping and oceans and talking about a lot of the innovation that is happening in that industry, and it's pulling regulation along thereafter. So I think business plays a dual role. One is to sort of innovate and advise governments, actually. And second is obviously to push for a level playing field. And a lot of business leaders are asking for that, a level playing field, regulation that helps business thrive and actually, come to its very best. But also certainly just working with government to deliver a lot of national plans and the sustainable development goals that no government and no economy can actually deliver without having private sector engagement.
You have such a unique vantage point at the Global Compact. Are there places you think are doing this very well that you wanted to highlight?
That's like asking me to pick my favorite child, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But let me tell you, I've seen such strong alignment and push on climate action. And we were just talking about this, about our reflections from Dubai. And I know it was a painful process. There was times when we weren't sure what the language was going to look like around fossil fuel and coal, and we just talking about the phase out and not phasing down, because that's absolutely critical. But outside of those intergovernmental negotiations, there is so much momentum happening with the private sector, industry coalitions that are innovating and actually setting really high levels of ambition, financing and commitment, discussions that are really aiming to bring together solutions, not just for the global global north, but for the global south. Because a lot of businesses have supply chains, they have employees, they get resources from the global south, and they're very keen to be sustainable and resilient. So I really enjoy seeing the work of certainly our group of companies working in climate action, but very broadly. I think there's a lot of really strong work that is going on there. If I could share something else, I mean, just right after COP, went over to Atlanta where there was another intergovernmental conference. It was a conference on anti-corruption, an area that's not often talked about. And we convened the first ever private sector forum on anti-corruption alongside government. It was being hosted in the US, hence Atlanta. But the outcome of that was a strong call to action by governments and a real recognition of the work of the Global Compact and our companies and the need to really work effectively and efficiently to stamp out corruption. So there are places where you see this great intersection and collaborative piece. But I just want to call out the climate piece because that was very recent in Dubai.
And getting back to the climate piece, do you think oftentimes, perhaps big picture, we may miss the role of the private sector, the way what implementation is happening among business versus kind of focusing on governments and the language?
Yeah. Well, look, that's, the discussions happen at the context of an intergovernmental conference. So that's sort of the overall framing. But, if you look at it, where's implementation going to happen? It's going to happen where, business sits. So even the call for the phase out, that's going to be driven very much by the private sector. Financing, there's a lot looking about how you can leverage private financing to really deliver on climate finance and all the investments that we need to do. The energy transition, the innovations, the renewable energy solutions are going to be private sector led and driven. But I think even if I go up to the very top level, because there's a strong call for governments to review their nationally determined contributions, essentially their transition plans, governments will have to sit with the private sector to design those NDCs. So perhaps the narrative doesn't come out as balanced, but I'd like to believe it's because the private sector is busy doing. And that was a COP for implementation and action. And I think that's really the big push that we want to bring along.
When we're talking about trust, and we're thinking particularly about climate, greenwashing is such a huge problem. And there is a credibility issue. There are companies that are doing things. There are a lot of companies that are saying they're doing things. Can you talk about the UN Global Compact's ability to address that?
Right. So I'll be clear. I mean, the Global Compact is a voluntary membership organization. We're not an enforcement organization, neither do we set regulation. But we certainly believe and support a lot of the standardization that is going on, because greenwashing simply just robs us of what our future is meant to be. So very much welcome a lot of the work that is going on. I mean, Europe has been very progressive in its regulation. I think there's the opportunity to harmonize a little bit more. I can certainly imagine it is confusing. We hear from a lot of companies that, what framework should we adopt? What do we do? If you're sitting in the EU, there's one set of regulation, but if you're doing business in the US, it's something else. So if you think about a company that might have a footprint across continents, there's a plethora of regulations that they will have to adhere to. And I think we just need to be careful that we don't crowd out the opportunities for innovative partnerships and for business to really flow across borders. But I do believe it's important to have standards that support companies be as transparent and accountable as they are. In the Global Compact, we do have a reporting mechanism. It is voluntary. We call it the communication on progress. But, we do also want to ensure that companies do stick to the commitments that they make. And for us, it's really about commitments and then demonstrating the actions towards them. On climate, though, we are one of the co-founders of the Science-Based Targets Initiative that supports companies actually make those green transitions from a science-based perspective. So that's a piece of work that we do outside of our reporting framework.
So given that it's a voluntary organization, what happens if you find out that people are not following those standards?
Oh, there's been lots of instances where we've had to ask companies to leave, simply because, it's very clear that either you've sort of violated what we call our principles, or there's legal proceedings, or just egregious behavior. And we have had precedents on that, large companies, small companies, because we do try to be sure that at the C-suite level, and we ask for CEO commitment, that you really are committed to what it is that you say you're going to do within the compact.
As today we're talking about business growth through sustainable business practices, I wonder what you've heard this week that makes you think like excited about what's to come, or kind of despairing, like we have so much more to go here? Can you share either one of those or both?
Yeah, a couple of key quotes, and I'll give you three. One of my most favorite. I kicked off on Monday listening to a session about rebuilding trust, and it was a really great conversation. And those energy, momentum. This is the place. We've got to work together, etc. And then a young person came onto the stage and said, you guys are talking about rebuilding. There's a generation that hasn't even known trust. Yeah? They look and see all this fractured world, fragmented world, and division. So for the generation out there, it's about building trust to begin with. I thought that was just a fantastic contextualization. The second was listening to Bill Gates when he was talking about health and innovation, and just reinforcing that, there's been lots of investments in innovation, solutions abound. The biggest challenge is in delivery. And why is delivery, stagnated? Because of all the fractures that exist. And so just the simple need for us to get that collaborative platform going, to get very basic solutions that will save the lives of, mothers in pregnancy and children at birth to live. So that was another one, just a reflection on the delivery piece. The third actually was a quote by the Secretary General of the UN, and he gave a keynote yesterday, and he just said, we've got to get back to a governance structure that builds trust. So reflection on the fracturedness at the highest level of politics, and the need to really look at how we stick to norms, believe in the norms that have been set globally, and get those back into shape. Because once that is, everything else can flow.
Given the fact that half the world's population this year is undergoing elections, do you feel like confident that we will move in that direction?
Yeah, I think they said it's about 50 countries or so. It's enormous, yeah? It's incredible because the transition process is a good one. I mean, countries can renew. I love the fact when you see younger people getting engaged in the democratic process. But, I think predictability is what the concern is. I think there's concerns about misinformation, disinformation, how much that can influence electoral outcomes. There's youth apathy. I talked about the fact that people don't even know trust in there. And then there's just, what way does the politics swing? And from a business perspective, I mean, where people are looking for predictability, this is a big one because, politics can influence what happens with interest rates and borrowing. It can influence what happens with policy and regulation. It can actually, and then if there's, unrest after elections, then it just influences and impacts how business is done. So there's lots to watch out for. I mean, I do hope for great political transitions, but it's going to be a very interesting year for the world.
You'll have to come back next year, and we'll revisit this question.
I sure will.
Sana, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just going to pass the microphone over to my colleague, Axios publisher, Nicholas Johnson.
Thank you, Nyla. We're almost there. I can see the finish line in sight. Another incredible Davos in the books, like Nyla said. This is our 11th event here in Axios House. We're so happy that all of you are able to join us, whether this is your first event, whether you've been here for all 11. We're so grateful. And then I am super happy about the support from the partners that we've received all week to make all of this possible. And maybe we saved the best for last. Today's conversation is possible from our friends at Lenovo. And so I'm happy to welcome to a view from the top conversation, Lenovo's President of International Markets. I wanted to make sure I got that right. Matthew Zielinski, welcome to Axios House. Let's start, we're talking business transformation. I think that's a fascinating thing to talk about with Lenovo about at a very high level. Tell us a little bit about that transition beyond the PC.
Sure. Well, I think everybody, first of all, I know I'm like the thing keeping between you to your next, and I'll talk super fast, so bear with me for a second. But look, probably a lot of you know Lenovo is like a really big PC company. Everybody has ThinkPads. You walk around Davos, and if you're in the lounges, thankfully you see a lot of our stuff. But the truth is we're far more than that. And, we own Motorola smartphone business, which, by the way, is super cool. I've got the new model in my pocket. It's got peach fudge on the outside. It's a flip phone. It sounds like crazy, but that's where the cheesy part comes, and is historically we've been very much a device-focused company. And we're proud of what we build, but that's not what customers want, particularly commercial customers. They want to have somebody that can come in and talk about, hey, what are the outcomes that you're trying to affect? How can you help me solve real problems? And so, not to opine about the pandemic, but that was really the catalyst of having conversations when people didn't know how to handle IT. And so we quickly reorganized just before that, coincidentally, and now our conversations, instead of selling product, are much deeper than that. And as a result, we're still the biggest PC company in the world. We're the 8th smartphone company in the world, on our way to number 3 in fantastic products. 3rd infrastructure data center company in the world, and now 40% of the company is not PC. So we're on the right track.
Got it. So let's add another layer to that. A big
Sure.
topic here at Davos is sustainability. As part of that transformation, services and products, how does that sustainability fit into it?
It's pivotal. I mean, first of all, unfortunately, the buzz, or fortunately for us, AI is a big topic this year. But
As by law, Swiss law, we have to talk about it a little
yeah,
bit.
I'm trust me, I can do it until I'm blue in the face. But it's almost saddening because I feel like some of the environmental aspects took a little bit of a backseat. It never has been that way with us at the core. We've been publishing sustainability reports for the better part of 17 years. You know, and things like we're really focused in this in a few-step process. Like in the near term, you know, we've tripled the amount of solar installations to power our factories and our offices all around the world. We've spent, you know, $50 million in philanthropic efforts affecting 60 million people around the world. We've done things to, you know, really get on track to our 2030 needs, and even the products that we build. 300 of our products, particularly in our ThinkPad and all the consumer PC brands, are built from recycled materials. So it really is at the center of everything that we do. And then you think about, well, how do I help the market innovate with sustainability in mind? And you know, with this whole AI topic, and you think about infrastructure and servers, these things burn a ton of power. But the way we help combat that is a unique solution with water cooling that takes energy efficiency up 30% using 30% less power consumption, which is obviously a really big reason why we're the #1 supercomputer provider in the world. And if you think about it, we're really looking at 360-degree recyclability in all of our products and making sure that we own from cradle to grave the life cycle of all of our products, such that we do the asset recovery and recycle it in a responsible way. So it really is paramount in all that we do.
And the long-term goal is net zero. Tell me about like how you
Sure.
look out in further years, what that aspiration is.
We're net zero by 2050, but there's a difference. You know, everybody says net zero by a certain year, but they don't back it up through the Science-Based Targets Initiative. What Sand was just talking about is part of the UN Global Compact, and we've been the first of any PC and smartphone maker to sign up with the SBTI. And what that does is it takes the hope cast out of it and gives you a real roadmap and frankly accountability, where we'll be audited, if you will, on a regular basis to see if we're really on track to real goals for 2050. So I think that is a really big differentiator for us.
This is a little bit about putting the money where the mouth is. I mean, a lot of people talk about sustainability goals and net zero aspirations that are far in the future. I think what you're talking about here, we talked about a little bit earlier, is how do you put the data behind that so it's real?
Yeah, talk is cheap, so somebody keep me honest. That's basically our approach.
In addition to sustainability, something that's very interesting here is sort of inclusion. Can you talk a little bit about how Lenovo looks at that? I mean, I think the version's like a technology for all. Yeah. How does that fit into the transformation elements as well?
Yeah, so it's a nice tagline, smarter technology for all, but we mean it. And it's interesting. We innovate a lot of things ourselves. We spend billions of dollars a year in R&D. But one thing we've also introduced is something called our product diversity office. You know, so that means when we're designing products in mind, you know, we have a subset of people that are really thinking about impairments and disabilities and the like to make sure that our products are really accessible for all. In addition to that, when you think about all the ethical challenges and bias challenges with artificial intelligence, that exact same group is now going to be figuring out, okay, before we deploy a product or solution, are we thinking through any bias, particularly gender bias, that may come up as a result of whatever inferencing comes out of a large language model? It can be devastating, it can be hurtful, it can be deadly in certain circumstances. And we also have an ethical AI committee. So we have several governing bodies from the beginning of a project or a product concept stage that really is pressure testing cross-functionally. Are these really for everybody? And is this an ethical approach to market?
I mean, my takeaway from this, taking a step back, is that there's a much more holistic view of transformation, right? You can start with saying like, okay, look, we're doing from one product to another kind of product or another kind of service, but there's so much that can layer on top of that, separate from just your product mix. Mm-hmm. Is that the way you think about it? Is like how to include, make sure we're checking all these other boxes as we think about the transformation of the business?
Absolutely, and it's not just about our own products in general. There's a gazillion software things that you can install, whether it's on infrastructure or PC. So we have to also pressure test the ecosystem and really work as one of the largest players in tech to drive the ecosystem in the right direction, both from a sustainability standpoint and an inclusion standpoint.
So I'd love to take some of these and let you give some lessons for the people here. I'm going to tell one joke for the last time at my time at Davos. What I love about Davos is that everyone in the room is either very smart and very important or thinks they're very smart and very important on these topics. I think we have people who actually are very smart and important. So on this issue of business transformation, what is the advice? What is the takeaways you think that these people can take back to their home countries, back to their home companies?
There's a couple of things. If you're a manufacturer, I would really think long and hard about being global and local. And frankly, that's beyond manufacturing, even mindset. One thing that's really unique about the company is I don't think we have an identity, but our nationality is very local. So as much as we have, a couple of big motherships and headquarters, we allow every geo, every country to be very autonomous, to be very adaptable and make decisions very, very quickly, such that at the country level, we have our own unique identity. So I think, being very, we call it our global local strategy, being very localized in your thinking and your process and your people, and making sure that you keep the decisions closest to the ground.
So I think the takeaway, I guess, is like you should have at a very high level a leadership direction to go in.
Correct.
The implementation of that can be adjusted depending on what country, what the locality is, what those goals.
Correct, and be very autonomous and trusting in that model.
All right. Well, we've made it to the end of Axios House. We're about to get the hook here. We don't want to stand in the way of people and their lunch, but we like to end at Axios on one fun thing. We've made that one Davos thing. Tell me one fun thing, one cool thing. What's the best part about your week so far here on the promenade?
First of all, I'm 44 years old, so to me, I'm like, should I even be here right now? And so this is like the Super Bowl, totally starstruck all the time. I'm trying everything not to take pictures. And our first meeting this week, I'm walking in, got a couple new suits for the week, and we sit down, Fortune 20 CEO that I'm meeting for the first time, acquisition business, and he looks at me straight in the eye and he goes, "First time to Davos?" And I'm like, how the hell would he know that outside of, I look young? And he goes, "Buddy, change your shoes. Those shoes aren't going to work here." And so I wore my casual, shoes. I call them shit kickers because I'm from Texas, and they get dirty. Who cares? And that's just the way it is. But I guess if you want to look like a Davos first-time person, wear the fancy shoes because that doesn't work here.
Everybody learns that lesson the
I learned
hard
that,
way.
exactly.
Congratulations. Welcome to Davos. Can't wait to see your shoes next year. Thank you so much for being here, Matthew. Thank you for Lenovo for putting a great cap to the end of our week. Thank all of you for being here. Stick around. We have snacks. We have drinks open for another hour or so. Have a great week.
Thanks.